All right, Russell, you're going to show me Imprivata's vendor privilege access management. We've heard about privilege access management, but this is very much centered around those connecting from the outside into you. And our whole audience knows why this is a big deal. So show us what you got with Imprivata.
Absolutely. So we'll dive right in and log in as one of these third-party users. So you'll notice I'm at an email authorization step as I log in here, and then some terms. The email authorization is actually really important. It's an easy thing to skip or not think about because email's a terrible MFA. We all know that. But what it does do is really provide some employment verification. I may not know if John is still with the vendor, and they may not reach out to me to tell me they fired John, but they're going to take away his corporate email when they do so.
They're going to protect their own butt, and the way that you can protect your butt is this little verification step. So yeah, simple step can do a huge, have a huge impact on the security of who has access. That one little step. So I'm glad you started with that. All right, let's jump into the application.
Yeah. So we're logged in here and you can see a list of what we call applications. And that is how we really group up what a vendor needs access to. And you can see I've got two here. I can request access to one. So when I click on that, I can give a reason and send that off. And what's really important here is that's where delegation comes into play. I might have 500 vendors. And in some industries, that really happens. And my IT staff doesn't know what all of those 500 vendors need and when a ticket was put in with one. But delegating out to the teams that work with vendors means those approvals can happen in the right place.
That is very key because everyone is responsible for their security for their department.
Exactly. And that becomes kind of a theme that you end up seeing of successful organizations who've really mitigated risk is they don't try and centralize that and put it all on the shoulders of one person because that's where something slips through the cracks. Each department has to kind of own their vendors and how those vendors get in.
Okay.
So we'll look at what that means. How does a vendor get in? And we'll connect to the other application.
And oh, by the way, just to remind everyone, we're looking at this screen as if we're a vendor trying to connect to the company who is actually running Imprivata.
Exactly. So we get what we call the connection manager comes up here, and I'm going to initialize that. And what happens with this is we're opening up a secure tunnel between that vendor rep, wherever they are, and the VPAM server.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side of that, the VPAM server has a secure tunnel into the environment for the things a vendor has to get to.
By the way, VPAM, I'm sure, is a term that people haven't heard before. Privilege access management. The V is the vendor, not virtual. Vendor privilege access management. Is that a term you guys came up with?
So I came to Imprivata with the acquisition of SecureLink, where this product originated, and we started using that term, probably around 2016 or so.
Okay. So it's a dated term. I'm new to the game. Okay, go ahead.
Well, the funny thing is, we started using it in 2016. It didn't really pick up until the last few years. So normally, like people will like to claim that they kind of started something, but I think we really did. It took a while for it to pick up traction.
Hopefully, we're going to help it get some more visibility. Go on.
So I'm now connected. And this is the really important piece because I, as a vendor, now only have access to the very specific things that I need. In this case, that's a few different servers with different protocols. That can be any host as long as you can define it by IP or host name and you know what port and protocol is required. So any TCP or UDP, and that's one of the absolute key differences between the tools that your IT might use to RDP into a box and the tool your vendor might use to connect their client on their desktop that uses a custom port and uses a protocol they built in-house. And that's why the vendor tells you, that's why we need a VPN, because they don't understand that a tool like this can actually solve for that. And that becomes the really key piece of making sure a vendor has very selective access to just what they really need.
Right. A VPN just can't offer this kind of granular management of access.
Exactly. Typically, we see organizations trying to solve it with those tools. Suddenly, they've got a whole mess of things like firewalls to deal with, or creating an AD account, putting it in the right groups to get different permissions. And we just make it so much simpler to not just limit that access, but control and audit it and delegate the controls out to different teams. So when I launch RDP here, I'm simply landing on a desktop. So I'll drag that over from my other monitor where it launched. And this is just bringing me straight into a session here. So I'm getting connected to the system I need as a vendor to get
Mm-hmm.
in, view logs, fix my problem. This is what I would have used a VPN to do and then launch MSTSC. I'm getting all of that with a single click here. I don't need to know an account for that desktop. I'm not putting in a password for it. All of that's happening upstream from me as a vendor. The VPAM server, the Imprivata product right in the middle of that connection, is handling the audit and it's handling the injection of the actual accounts for those endpoints. So we do that with a lot of protocols. We do that with things like VNC and FTP,
Mm-hmm.
and here we've got an SSH connection. Same thing. It's going to launch, and I'll drag it over here, and we'll run a few commands. So that'll be in our history. But we're doing exactly the same thing. We're injecting a credential so the vendor doesn't need to know the actual account for an endpoint. And then we're auditing the connection so that we know exactly what the vendor did with the access they were given. And that's really it from the vendor's point of view. It's all about connecting to what they need and requesting access when they need something else.
All right, so let's see what on essentially on the customer side, what they're seeing the vendors doing. So this is now we're logged into the customer, sort of the customer view of the application, and this is all the sort of the vendor accesses that are happening, correct?
Exactly. So I'm logged in now as a full admin. One thing to note, we talk a lot about delegation and we have a really robust permission system. So basically every little thing that you see here is controlled by a permission. So if I wanted to give a user some real selective access to manage one vendor and only view history, I could totally do that. But as a full admin, we see a whole lot more. But the main thing is I can go to history here and I can get to the information I want quickly and easily. So if all I care about is when did the access start, how long was it, who was it, and maybe the host and service, I can filter that out. And now I can get in and I can see, oh, the access that just happened, the SSH connection, the RDP connection. I can get into those and I can do things like download a video of that session, which again, there's a lot of solutions out there that kind of try to capture this by recording the vendor's screen. And we sit in the protocol kind of upstream from the user. So
Mm-hmm.
for us, that means when we capture this video of the session, it's something that the user has no control over preventing. It's happening within the protocol on the server between the user and the endpoint they're getting to, so we can ensure that it's happening as needed. So that's the really high level. And there's lots of little pieces around, how do we delegate things? And at the end of the day, though, it's about managing that vendor's identity, controlling the access that they need, and delegating that out to the right teams to manage, and then being able to hold everyone accountable in the end. Every single action, whether it's the approval, the connection itself, there's an audit so you know who was doing what at what time.
All right, then there's one more view that you're going to show us, correct?
Yeah. So one last thing here. You see a lot of PAM systems that extend towards using it to manage vendors. And the problem there becomes you're taking a tool that was built and designed for internal users that has a different approach to security, it has different controls, and you're extending that over to how you're controlling your third parties. And that means their identities are now being managed as internal identities most of the time. And suddenly you have problems there because you don't get that confirmation or that way to prevent that user from accessing when they're no longer with that vendor. And instead, we're really taking the other approach. We're saying this system's now great for your vendors. It controls everything in a tight way that makes sure they have the access they need and only the access. And that's the right way to approach your internal users as well, because it's really about zero trust. And so here we can see what this looks like for an internal user. This is almost a sneak preview. Some of this is stuff that's coming out in the next couple of months here. But this is a view from a user who isn't a vendor. We don't see anything related to vendors in the system, but they can connect to things as they need because they're a member of the right groups in my single sign-on
Okay.
provider, and my SAML or my AD. I can request access to other things, I can connect, but I can even go one step further and I can get to the vault. So if I need to get in here and I need to unlock a credential, we can do a couple of things. We can give that user the ability to unlock the credential based on permissions. So if I need to go hurry and fix a system and I need an admin account to do it, I can get to that here through the vault. But I can also use that to trigger rotation. So once this credential's been unlocked, I can have another task on the system that says 15 minutes later, we need to change that password and we need to connect to the endpoint automatically and make sure that happens. And that kind of becomes the power of making sure you're approaching things for your vendors correctly and then extending that capability down to your internal users in what looks more like traditional PAM functionality.
That's very, very cool. All right. Well, I'm going to say to our audience, if you want to improve the security between yourself and your vendors, your contractors who need access to your data, but not all access, check out what they're doing over at Imprivata. We put the web address right there. Go check them out for the VPAM, Vendor Privileged Access Management. Not small v, but capital V, PAM. Check them out.